So welcome everybody. This is another opportunity to be with our friend Dan Cozort, who is presenting about Buddhism and climate change. So this is the fourth installment, and I will pass the baton on to Dan now.
Okay, well, hello everybody, and thanks for showing up today. Um, so talking to Piero, he urged me not to try to cram in too much, in just a few times of 20 minutes each. And so, I'm perfectly happy to come back after next week and to do some more. I had identified three broad areas that where I think that Buddhism is relevant to climate change. The first was countering mistaken ideas or positions. And, we went over that in the first couple of sessions this past week. And then I started to talk about how Buddhism models ethical behavior and talk about the first of the Buddhist precepts, which is about non-harming, which obviously would have an enormous impact if it were taken seriously by people around the world, given the fact that something like 1.3 trillion animals are slaughtered annually for human consumption, and that 70% about of the wildlife in the world has disappeared since 1970. These are kind of shocking statistics, right? If everybody, embraced this principle, it might be quite different. So anyway, today I wanted to go on and talk about the various views about vegetarianism that you can find within Buddhism. Buddhists aren't at all of one mind about this. And I hope this will be provocative and that you might have some reactions to this, some thoughts, some questions that we can talk about afterwards. And then I'll go on and talk about some other ethical positions, some virtues that are relevant, I think, such as generosity and contentment and frugality. Um, when I did this another time, I also talked about what's called loosely Buddhist economics, a Buddhist view about capitalism, which Piero was just referring to, and about consumerism in particular. So if I'm going to go on to another week, I guess I'll do that, but that's probably what'll happen after this coming week. Anyway, that's kind of the general plan. So today I thought I would start with talking about vegetarianism. So I hope everybody sees that all right.
Yes.
So anyway, yeah. So approximately 92% of the human population eats meat. In other words, vegetarianism is not that really widespread. And we have to remember that this 8% figure is probably quite bumped up by the fact that about a third of the people in India, 1.4 billion altogether, right? About a third of the people of India are vegetarian. And not necessarily because that's what they believe they ought to be, but it may be because, frankly, in India, meat costs more than it does, here compared to one's income. And Buddhist cultures are probably about the same as others. This is also the figure for the Buddhist culture of Taiwan, for instance. And I also had said that people who do eat meat generally have the ambivalent attitude that it's okay to raise animals for slaughter and to kill them, but it ought to be done in a humane way. It ought not to be done cruelly. Okay. Then going on to the topic of vegetarianism proper. Um, in the Vinaya, the Buddha is said to have told monks that they shouldn't eat meat if they thought an animal was killed specifically for them. If you don't know, the Vinaya is the part of the Buddhist scriptures concerned with the ethics of monastics. This statement of the Buddha's is controversial. Some people think that he didn't approve of meat eating at all. And the only reason why this appears in the Vinaya is because some monks didn't want to give up eating meat. So they wanted some chance to do it. Others think that he disapproved of eating meat, but he allowed this because otherwise it might negatively affect the propagation of the Dharma. In other words, Buddhist monks and nuns later were beggars, depending upon the goodwill of lay people. And if they started to refuse food that was given to them, then it might ruin the whole prospect. Okay. That said, there is a long history of vegetarianism in Buddhism, particularly by monastics, who have reasoned, as we might, that although the Buddha said they could eat meat in certain circumstances, that doesn't mean that they should in other circumstances. And they tried to organize their dealings with lay people so that it wouldn't be an issue. In other words, if in general lay people knew that monks didn't eat meat, they wouldn't offer it. And if the monks are preparing their own food, then they don't include meat. In any case, Mahayana Buddhism emerged a couple of thousand years ago, at least, and it has a strong impetus towards vegetarianism. Two influential scriptures, the Lankavatara and the Mahaparinirvana, explicitly rule out eating meat. It also appears that Indian Buddhism was highly vegetarian. Fashang was a Chinese monk who visited India in the 5th century, and he reported that the only meat eaters in India were untouchables. So that would mean, of course, that Buddhist monks and nuns didn't eat meat, and I guess most Buddhist lay people as well. And in Chinese and Japanese Buddhism, monastics from the 6th century onwards in China and Japan up to the 19th century, were vegetarian, and many lay people were as well. Finally, although it's true that in Tibet, most monks and nuns, along with virtually all lay people, did consume meat. In recent decades, thousands of the monks and nuns have become vegetarians. I remember that it was being discussed at Sera Monastery in South India when I stayed there in 1993. And I later heard that they had voted to go vegetarian. And this has also been happening in Eastern Tibet. But like I said, Buddhists aren't of one mind about this at all. Um, so for many centuries, the fact that the Buddha didn't absolutely prohibit meat eating has been used as an excuse. I've already referred to Tibet, where people argued that they really didn't have a choice given Tibet's harsh climate. But also, it has been argued that the general moral hierarchy placing animals lower than humans is justified. And because humans stand higher than this, it's okay for them to rely upon the flesh of other animals for their sustenance. Why do we have more kinds of suffering? The idea is that large brain animals have a higher degree of sentience, a higher degree of experiencing pain. For instance, we know that humans can suffer from regret, and that we can anticipate our deaths, for instance, and fear them, whereas other animals do not. It's also been observed that vegetarianism can be problematic, that there's a suffering caused even by vegetarianism because there's no way of producing food that doesn't harm other creatures. And that if you are attached to your vegetarianism and you look down on other people who are still eating meat, that's a source of pride, and that can lead to other kinds of negative consequences. And then finally, I might also mention that, pest control remains a problem for human and animal food and health. So, you raise the question, don't we have to kill rats? Some would argue that we also need to cull herds of deer because if left unchecked, um, the deer will destroy forests that are the habitat of other creatures. And also they get themselves into a position where they starve because they're so territorial that they don't move away once their food source is gone. I also wanted to bring before you, I think, an interesting perspective that comes from the poet Gary Snyder, who some of you may know as a poet, some of you may know as a practitioner of Zen Buddhism. And he wrote an article called Indra's Net as Food Chain. So he likes to use the word chain instead of the web instead of the word chain, because chain implies hierarchy, which in turn denies the equal worth of each life. So in his view, we're one particular part of the food web, but also everywhere in the food web. So, I mean, he takes a Zen position on this, which is influenced by Huayan Buddhism, which was the radical non-dualism that, I discussed in the kind of first of our meetings. So you find things like this in his article. The life of a stone or a weed is as completely beautiful and authentic, wise, and valuable as the life of, say, Einstein, hence the preciousness of mice and weeds. You'd only come up with something like that if you view all things as being interpenetrating and the entire universe as depending upon, this grain of sand, or in this case, mice and weeds. But he also goes on to say, to remove ourselves from the meat-eating aspect of our location in the food web would seem to be asserting for ourselves a special place in that web, and thus would violate the biocentrism of Indra's net. So in this biocentric Indra's net view, everything, is connected to everything else. And we are just that node in this food web that is omnivorous. A couple other quotes that I picked out of this that I think are kind of provocative. There is no death that is not somebody's food, right? No life that is not somebody's death. The shimmering food chain, food web, is the scary, beautiful condition of the biosphere. And if we eat each other, is it not a giant act of love we live within? They are us. We are like family, giving gifts to each other. Interbeing is inter-eating. Okay. I hope to hear from you about this when we get back together in a few minutes. He is inspired by Native American hunting practices. As we've discussed before, hunter-gatherer societies are really obsessed with animals, other animals, I should say. They think about them constantly. They respect the animal. They even love the animal. They worship the animal. They identify with the animal. So as he puts it, the hunter in these ways participates rather than dominates, not asserting any right to kill, and thinking that hunting is the reception of a gift, that you become successful as a hunter when the animal presents itself to you, gives itself to you, so that you might take its life and eat it. And also there's the idea that humans aid animals' fertility. So, throughout Native American cultures, you can find rituals done on an annual or even more often basis to regenerate animal lives. For instance, the Kwakiutl of what's the island, Victoria Island, I guess, off the coast of Canada, have an annual bladder festival where they collect the bladders of seabirds that they have killed and sink them in the ocean, which is thought to regenerate them. And similar sorts of things are done elsewhere. So in Snyder's way of putting this, there is not just an interbeing, but an inter-knowing, knowing the way an animal does. So, it's interesting to think about. Evolutionary psychologists believe that hunting may have had as much influence on our development of a limbic center, our emotional center. And this is because hunters tried to understand the emotional states of the animals they hunted and mimic them. We know that the dances of many indigenous peoples are based on animal behaviors. And even we continue to use animals as a reference point for human emotions, such as when we say, someone is sly as a fox or stubborn as a mule. Another perspective, somewhat different than Snyder's, is whether or not we ought to think about non-human animals as being fellow persons. So, we know that for all types of Buddhism, sentient being and person are synonyms. And so, therefore, all creatures, including ourselves, of course, are persons. But in Western cultures, probably most cultures in the world at this point, person only means human beings. So I think it's interesting to look at this. Jeff Sebo, who is the director of animal studies at NYU, wrote an article in the New York Times saying that chimpanzees ought to be included in the category of persons. He says it's absolutely exclusionary, unacceptably exclusionary, that personhood be based on the ability to use language and reason in abstract and sophisticated ways. He points out that infants, of course, can't do this. Do we regard human infants as not persons? No. That some people are never able to use language and reason because because they're handicapped in that way. Others lose the ability later in life to do this. I'm thinking of a picture I saw this morning of a Ukrainian soldier who's suffering from a brain damage, for instance. Do we regard him no longer as a person? So his article points out that although there are humans who can't pass the standard of conscious experience, emotionality, a sense of self, or bonds of care or interdependence, all of these people we've just named are considered persons anyway, whereas the animals who can pass this standard are not considered persons. So his definition of person is someone who has some or all of the following features: conscious experience, emotionality, a sense of self, or bonds of care or interdependence. So if you do that, what other animals than humans would qualify as persons? Well, chimps, bonobos, gorillas, to name other primates, but also cats, dogs, even fish, chickens, cows, pigs. You could make quite a long list of animals that have some or more of these qualities. Then what rights might these persons have if they were recognized as person? Would they have the right of liberty? So then we wouldn't cage them in zoos or pen them up in sties or corral them in the case of, uh, cattle. Would they have the right to property? One of the books I have over here that I've read recently is called you may not be able to see me here, but it's called Wildlife as Property Owners, A New Conception of Animal Rights. And it's by Karen Bradshaw, who is a professor of law. Um, in fact, there are already some cases around the world where I think a river in New Zealand and I forget what else, but there's some natural features that have been granted personhood before the law. Um, anyway, if say chimps were considered persons, how would that work out? Would they be treated like humans, but humans who are minors? So, uh, they wouldn't have the right to drive, for instance. They wouldn't have a bank account and so forth, but otherwise might be treated like humans who are judged mentally incapable of handling their own affairs. Anyway, these are controversial things, and I just think it would be interesting to talk about them some more. Um, let's see, I don't know how much more I can do today, given our time. Um, I think I should go on and talk about generosity a bit, though. So I'll do that. So I wanted to call attention to some other virtues, and you might call these economic virtues, because they have to do with how we relate to material stuff as well as to other people. So generosity, contentment, and frugality. Um, by cultivating these virtues, we'd show others how it might be possible for all of us to live happy, satisfying lives by restraining our desires, by allowing ourselves to be happy within these constraints, and by sharing with others. We know it's not possible within the limits of the planet for everyone to have the lifestyle of wealthy nations. There's just too many of us, as Piero likes to point out over and over again. And it's not fair to ask the poor people of the world to struggle not only with their present circumstances, but ones that are likely to be a lot worse. So the wealthier people in the world obviously have to change their ways. So one of these ways would be to cultivate generosity. Um, Generosity means giving away and or sharing, and it has many benefits. I like to think of it as the positive counterpart to non-harm, a way to fulfill the ahimsa, even if you have a generally harmful lifestyle, that is to say, one of high consumption. You can make up for it by generosity. And as is true for a lot of behaviors, once you begin to practice something positive, like generosity, your mentality about your material and other desires starts to change, right? So for a lot of people who would find it difficult to change their lifestyle, I think it's best to start on the other end with generosity. Um, so, like you wouldn't be um, refusing to receive your salary, but you give part of it away. And as you give to those who have less than you, you begin to see that it isn't necessary to have so much in order to be happy. And you begin to feel it's not fair for you to have so much while others have so little, which makes it even easier then for you to be even more generous. Um, and the lessons you learn from the experience of generosity are ones you can communicate to others in your social circle. I'd also like to point out that it's an excellent way to cultivate non-attachment and to understand impermanence and emptiness. David Loy says about this, dana, which is generosity, is the most important concept in thinking about society and economics because it's the main way non-attachment is cultivated and demonstrated. A bodhisattva's entire life is dana. So it works on both a personal and social level. On a personal level, generosity undermines the false self of an isolated self. We think of ourselves as being separate and independent from other people. It breaks down that sense when you share with others. So it undermines self-cherishing and miserliness and makes a habit out of kindness. And then on a social level, generosity undermines the false sense of an isolated society, and the sense that leads to nationalism, where you feel that your nation is superior to others and perhaps ought to be controlling them, which in turn, on a personal level, undermines the false pride that one might have in one's country. Um, you know, um, you can say that your country is great because it might be great in a number of ways, but you should also realize that other countries also have virtues and may exceed yours in several ways. Um, Generosity also counteracts our tendencies to be miserly. In Buddhist teachings, it's pointed out that miserliness will lead to other people resenting you, hating you, and wanting to steal from you. That's all pretty obvious. But it's also taught that it can be the result of it, miserliness, can be birthed in the realm of the hungry ghosts, the pretas, after you die. Now, you might not believe in the existence of such a realm, but if you do believe in rebirth, what this is saying is that being miserly now will result in poverty later on. Or you can think about it in a different way. The Tibetan teacher Chögyam Trungpa, for instance, talked about it as a state of mind. Being miserly means that somehow you feel poor. You feel as though you don't have enough. And that's a kind of suffering, but it's a suffering that can be alleviated by generosity. Um, I just the generosity can be in a lot of different ways. It can be material, of course, giving away your resources, but giving your attention to other people, giving your time to them, is also generosity, and giving them your knowledge of the Dharma is said actually to be the greatest gift at all of all, because in the long run, it may be what helps them the most. I put over on the right a picture of the paragon of generosity. This is Prince Vesantara. The story goes that he was so generous that eventually, when asked, he gave away even his wife and his children and himself. Of course, this was just a test, and everything was restored to him. But bodhisattvas are supposed to be able to give away just everything. Okay, well, there's actually more things to be said, maybe about generosity, but that's all the time I should take for today, probably more than I should have. So I'll stop there. Um, so anyway, we talked about vegetarianism, about Gary Snyder's unusual take on whether or not it might be okay to eat meat, and talked about generosity. So I'm wondering what you might have to say about these things.
I want to thank you, Dan, again. Great presentation. 92% of the people of the world eat meat. That I think the statistics that you presented, right?
Right.
And naturally, the views from Snyder that I didn't know, very provocative. That interbeing is inter-eating. That's very provocative. But there are some other arguments pro vegetarianism, as you know, that the production of meat, the transportation of meat, the packaging of meat, the refrigeration of meat, all these things have a tremendous negative impact. The deforestation for the cultivation of pastures, all this has a tremendous negative impact on the climate. So there's something to be said about the non-consumption of meat.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, it's all the cause really, again, is there are too many humans on the world that keep pointing this, and the deforestation, not only for creating agricultural fields, but the deforestation for creating more shelters, meaning more houses and apartments and buildings and things like this, that are all having an effect on the wildlife and on the world.
Yeah.
You were going.
Could I pose a question here to
Sure.
everybody? I mean, it's obvious that we would all think that factory farming is an abomination and should be outlawed everywhere in the world. But I'm thinking about, well, there was a great film called something like The Greatest Little Farm or something like that.
Yes.
And there you see, and I saw this also at the Dickinson farm, Dickinson College farm, where animals were raised along with the production of a wide variety of food. And the animals had a really important part to play in the overall health of the farm. And
Correct.
then at the end, the animals were slaughtered after having lived a very natural sort of, life in a humane way, and the people ate that food. And I'm just wondering, like, if you think even that is something that is immoral.
We try to adhere to the precept of do no harm, but actually we have to adhere to a different precept, that is do minimum harm, because it's impossible to go through our life here on planet not harming uh, in some ways, right? So I'm okay with. I have to say that I particularly have eaten meat coming from Brazil and living in Argentina. Probably there wasn't a single meal where there wasn't meat on my plate. So that's the way that I have lived. But perhaps there wasn't really, I think you call factory farming. Uh, it was more like, cows free in pasture. But I just want to add something else here that I thought it was interesting. And I'll send this if I can find. Did you had a in one of the slides you had a monk, and he had the something saying that he rescued strays. What did what
Right.
did what did he rescue? Stray cats?
And dogs. Yeah. I, I
Okay.
don't I don't think he went down to the level of say rats.
Well,
But
so this is interesting that you talk about pest control, and then I'll stop and I'll leave the floor open. in Hawaii, there is an infestation of cats, feral cats in Hawaii, and they are because they are in the wild, they are killing the native birds. So the native
Right.
birds are disappearing. And they're also bringing toxoplasmosis, if I'm not mistaken, to the seals. So seals are dying because of the toxoplasmosis that is coming from the cats. So a big debate goes on in Hawaii, what we're going to do with the feral cats, right? Are we going to do something to neuter all of them that apparently is impractical? Or is it okay to capture and kill the cats? So, and at the end of this documentary, um, I think I know one of the directors, and he asks, "What do you think we should do if we cannot neuter all of them? If they're killing the wildlife in Hawaii, it would be okay to kill them?" My answer, based on do no harm, I said, no, 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 we cannot kill them. So there's always these moral conflicts going on. But I'll stop there, Dan.
I
I want to
I know
thank
what the
you. I want to
I know
thank you.
what the biggest little farm would do. Introduce coyotes.
I forgot to stop recording.